How can variability of data be described with one number? Think about this question during the lesson. The center of the data for Anne's math quiz scores can be described using a single number. How can a single number describe how much Anne's scores vary from the mean? What measure of variability do you already know?
Variability describes the spread and clustering of data in a set.
So that was important.
Select your answer.
Variability describes the spread and structure of data. Okay, so how much does it vary? Is it grouped very close together? Are they grouped further apart? So the median, the middle number in the set of data, is 88, and the mean is 86. So you can see those two are relatively close numbers, and they're both types of averages. So we know average, we know mode, we know range.
The range is a measure of variability. How do you find it? In general, how is range related to variability?
So the range of the data is going to be the highest minus the lowest. How is it related? The bigger the range, the more spread out the data is.
To find the range, subtract the minimum data value from the maximum data value. The bigger the range, the more the data values are spread out. Here is another measure of variability. Step 1. Find the absolute deviation, the distance between each data value and the mean. You can find the absolute deviation from the mean by computing the absolute value of the difference between these numbers. Why do you find the absolute value of the difference between the data value and the mean?
All right, so it took me a second to see this, but what they're doing is they're taking the biggest number minus the smallest number still. But sometimes that gives you a negative answer. And so if you take the absolute value of that, then they're making sure that you come up with a positive answer. So it's the difference between each piece of data and the mean. So the mean in that case was 86. So instead of doing 73 minus 86 to get a negative 13 and then find the absolute value of that, they switched the numbers in the absolute value to be the bigger minus the smaller. And so that makes sense that way. Over here, you would have been getting, starting at this one here, you would have been getting a negative answer, which would have been fine because you're finding the absolute value of it anyway. But again, they switched the data so that that didn't become an issue.
You are finding each data value's distance from the mean, so you use absolute value. Step 2. Find the mean absolute deviation, MAD, the mean of the absolute deviations of a set of data. Add the absolute deviations and divide by the number of data values in the set.
All right, so there's really 3 steps to this if you're just starting out. First, you need to find the mean. In this example, they gave us the mean. So step 1 would be find the mean, or at least have it. After you find the mean, then you have to find how far each point is from the mean. And then you have to find the average or the mean of those deviations, right? A deviation is how much it is different from the mean. So kind of 3 steps. So when we find the mean, right, there's all of the scores. You add them together, divide by 8. So in this case, the mean is 86. And then second step, you find the distance each of those scores was from the mean. And then you find the average of those deviations by adding them together and dividing. So the mean absolute deviation.
Generally, Anne's quiz scores varied 6 75/100 points from the mean. Suppose all of Anne's quiz scores were in the 80s, but the mean was still 86. How would the mean absolute deviation change? The mean absolute deviation would be less than 6 75/100 because the scores would be closer to the mean. Now you know how variability of data can be described with one number.
Right, so the basic idea there is the smaller the mean absolute deviation, or the
Be
MAD,
described.
the smaller that number is, the closer the data is grouped together. And the range would also be closely grouped together. So when you have a big range, you have a larger absolute deviation. And when you have a smaller range, you have a smaller mean absolute deviation.
With one number.
Here's to try it.
Anne's vocabulary quiz scores are 75, 81, and 90. The mean score is 82. What is the mean absolute deviation?
Right, so first of all, they gave us the mean again, so we don't have to find that. But normally you would find that yourself, right? Add these three together, divide by 3, and you get 82. And then you subtract. You find the distance each of these is from 82, the mean. So this one happens to be 7. And then we need to find the distance 82 is from 81. So we could do 82 minus 81, and we get 1. And then the distance between 90 and 82 is 8. So our absolute deviations are 7, 1, and 8. And now we're finding the mean of those absolute deviations, called the mean absolute deviation, or the MAD, the mean absolute deviation. So we add those together. 7 plus 1 is 8, plus 8 is 16. 7 plus 1 plus 8 equals 16. And then we're going to divide that by 3 because we're finding the mean, right? You add the data together, you divide by 3, and we get 5 and 1/3, or 5.3 repeating, is the mean absolute deviation. All right, the questions that go with this, example 1, are on page 501 and 502. And we're going to ask you to do 8, 9, 10, 11, and 20A. I'll write those here. All right, there you go. Pages 501, 502, numbers 8, 9, 10, 11, and then just the first part of number 20. Raise your hand if you have any questions. We'll be glad to help you out.